His parents forced him to marry a woman in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the waist down after an accident. But once he started living with her, he uncovered a truth that left him breathless. Want to know who this woman really is and why she chose to enter this marriage? Don't take your eyes off a single detail of this story. Colin is 30, the only son of the Caldwell family, a dynasty that owns one of the top real estate empires in Seattle. Handsome face, tall build, an MBA degree, he's never lacked a thing in life. From the outside, he looked like someone born to take over, to lead. The truth? Colin wanted none of it. He liked law, liked reading, liked earning his own money. He once fought with his parents about studying something else, but in the end, he was forced into business school. Everything in his life, big or small, had always been decided by someone else. Everything, except Julia. She was the one choice that was truly his. Julia was a young, sharp, and brilliant lawyer from Atlanta. They met at a finance seminar and had been in love for over a year. She was the only person who had ever seen Colin's vulnerable side, the moment he admitted he didn't want to become a cold replica of his father. That spring, Colin had planned to propose to her. But right then, his family's company hit trouble. Assets were being drained. Several projects were frozen due to funding issues. Clients started suing over false advertising. The Caldwell Corporation, the golden name in real estate, was slowly cracking from the inside. But they kept it quiet. Not a single headline picked it up because they paid heavily to keep things under wraps. Only Colin, close enough to the numbers, could see the leaks for what they were. His father, Richard Caldwell, never spoke a word about the crisis. Every dinner still happened like clockwork, with the same dishes, at the same time, under the same dim candlelight as every other year. But Colin could see it. His father's eyes were no longer calm. Then came the solution. A marriage, he said, like he was negotiating a land deal. No. The Greystone family is ready to invest $5 million into our beachfront hotel chain if we can tie the two families together. I'm not a bargaining chip for your investments, Colin snapped. His mother stepped in, soft voice, firm tone. Son, you have to understand. We're fighting for survival. Colin stood up. I love Julia. I'm not marrying anyone else. A week later, his credit cards were shut down, his bank accounts frozen, his personal lawyer stopped returning his calls, his office access was revoked. Richard Caldwell had only one thing to say. If you want to keep living as a Caldwell, then start acting like one. The name Nora Greystone was put on the table. Only daughter of investment tycoon Henry Greystone. Once a rising star in state-level equestrian tournaments. 3 years ago, a car accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. Since then, she vanished from the public eye. No appearances, no statements. Just a wheelchair and a thin silhouette behind frosted glass. A week later, Colin agreed. Not for the money, but because he was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of realizing that to his parents he was just another tool in a suit. Julia didn't show up at the wedding. In truth, no one came. No friends, no colleagues, no extended family. The wedding took place in a discreet hotel on the outskirts of town. Everything was neat, elegant, and ice-cold. The bride sat in a wheelchair, a plain white dress, no jewels, no flowers. Her face was pale, her eyes steady and unflinching. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. Colin didn't kiss her after the vows were read. He just nodded. She nodded back. When signing the marriage license, her hand trembled slightly, but her gaze didn't. After the ceremony, once the catering staff had cleared everything away, Colin walked to the parking lot alone. The wind was sharp. No one came to see him off. No well wishes, no emotions left to feel. He opened the car door. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw Nora staring at him. Staring long. Staring straight. Like he was the one who'd end up paying for something he didn't even know he'd done. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Colin felt a chill down his spine. After the wedding, he didn't move into the master bedroom. He carried his bags to the living room and asked the longtime housekeeper to fix up the small guest room near the garage. No one objected. The less contact, the easier it would be to breathe. Nora didn't ask questions either. She stayed upstairs in her own room. It used to be a reading room, with big glass windows facing the backyard and an old oak desk. Now, it was the living space of a wife in name only. Quiet, detached, untouched by anything remotely intimate. But what really unsettled Colin was that Nora didn't seem like someone who needed to be taken care of. Quite the opposite. She got up at 6 a.m. every day, canceled the newspaper subscription, and switched to reading digital briefings from over 20 global financial outlets. Sometimes when Colin walked past her room, he'd catch a glimpse of her screen, dozens of tabs open, ranging from real estate market charts to digital currency analysis. Her scrolling was fast, precise. Not like someone learning. Not like someone living in quiet seclusion. A few days later, he noticed the family's financial management email had been redirected to Nora. She didn't ask for permission. She just sent him a detailed report of his personal expenses from the past 6 months, highlighting the unjustifiable ones and attached a cost reduction plan. The Range Rover you lease seems excessive. High maintenance cost, especially since the Mercedes in the garage is still in good condition. If the goal is to maintain public image, changing cars every 8 months is unnecessary. That line was in the email. No greeting, no sign-off. But it came with a supporting chart. Colin was speechless. No one had ever audited his personal life like that, especially not a stranger he married just to settle a debt. He knocked on her door. She let him in, still sitting upright behind the desk, laptop open, the screen casting light on half her face. "Don't you think going through my finances is over the line?" he asked. Nora didn't turn around. "I'm just doing what your father instructed. I have full rights to manage shared assets." "We don't have shared assets. We're legally married. I was granted Tier 1 authorization. I simply don't enjoy watching money leak any further." She turned to face him, voice steady, not raised but sharp enough to shut down any argument he had loading. Colin walked out, shutting the door a little too hard. For the first time, he realized he wasn't the one in control of this house. Then the unease began. She changed her dining habits, no longer ate with him. Her dinner was served separately, exactly at 7 p.m., at a small table by the second-floor window. Colin had once tried sitting with her. She didn't tell him to leave, but simply lifted a spoonful of hot porridge, stared out into the backyard, and sat in silence like he didn't exist. A week later, he found out Nora had replaced the entire family's tax advisory team. No one in the house said a word. His father even seemed pleased, noting that cash flow performance has clearly improved. Colin started feeling like something was off, deeply off. Nora wasn't fragile. She was running everything quietly, efficiently, and with ruthless precision. He decided to dig into the family's old investment records. A few failed projects caught his eye, failures with no clear cause. The timing of the failures matched a curious move. The Greystone family, Nora's family, had suddenly pulled out of the market in what was once seen as a bizarre, unexplained retreat. The media had chalked it up to risk management after their daughter's accident. But now, Colin was starting to think none of it was accidental. One night, he woke up at 2 a.m. to the faint echo of a voice from upstairs. He hadn't planned to snoop, but he couldn't fall back asleep. As he climbed the stairs, he clearly heard a voice. It was Nora. "Yes, I'm still on track." "No, it's not time yet. Let him keep thinking he's the one in control." Silence for a few seconds, then a small laugh, cold, like metal tapping stone. Colin stepped back, his heart thudded in his chest. Who was she talking about? Who was him? What plan? He went back downstairs, pulled out his phone, and opened his contact list. For the first time, he was ready to dig, really dig, into the woman he had assumed was the victim. Colin didn't sleep the rest of the night. Nora's voice, "Let him keep thinking he's the one in control," looped in his mind like a jammed clock hand. The next morning, he got to the office earlier than usual, not to work, but to start digging into the past. The Caldwell Company's old storage system had never been properly cleaned out. Colin knew that. He'd found supposedly destroyed documents there before. And this time, he uncovered the name Henry Greystone, Nora's father, on a list of strategic investment partners from 15 years ago. Back then, Henry held nearly 38% of the shares in a West Coast resort project, one that was later investigated and forced into a capital withdrawal. The paperwork stated that Caldwell had unilaterally terminated the agreement due to suspected financial misconduct on the Greystone side. But the financial records showed no wrongdoing on their part. In fact, it was Colin's own father, Richard, who had signed off on transferring the land to a third party afterward. at double the profit. What did that mean? It meant his father had set them up. The Greystones were cut out of the project, losing their entire investment. The media coverage at the time was vague, only emphasizing management errors. The Greystone family pulled away from the spotlight and practically vanished. And then, 3 years later, Nora had an accident. A few lines in the press: car lost control, spinal injury. After that, she disappeared completely from public view. But her hidden LinkedIn profile, the one Colin had to trace through old contacts in the investment world, told a completely different story. Nora had studied abroad in Zurich, majoring in financial management, graduated with honors, interned at a venture capital fund, and then vanished from the internet. No sign of someone who needed a wheelchair, no medical notes, no public health records, just a woman who knew exactly how to vanish. Colin came home with his mind spinning. That night, he sat silently in his car in the garage, holding an old phone with a secondary SIM card. He was watching the feed from a tiny camera he'd installed in the upstairs hallway, something he'd set up after overhearing that late-night phone call. Midnight. The light in Nora's room flicked on. Moments later, the door opened. And then he saw something he never thought he'd see. Nora stood up. Slowly, steadily. No sign of pain, no struggle. She walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a folder, and returned to her desk. Her movements were smooth, controlled, not shaky, not stiff. He stared at the screen, heart pounding, fingers gripping the phone like it might crack. She wasn't paralyzed, not at all. The next morning, he said nothing, pretended to leave for work early. But before stepping out, he went back to the room, retrieved the camera, and transferred the footage, Nora standing, onto a separate memory card. The next night, he knocked on her door. Nora was reading. Her eyes didn't lift from the page. "What do you want?" she asked calmly. "You can walk, can't you?" he said. No build-up. Just the truth. She looked up at him. No surprise, no flinch. "You've seen the footage, haven't you?" Colin didn't answer. His hand clenched the memory card inside his pocket. Nora stood up. No stumble, no tremble, no more pretending. She walked over to her desk, took out a small box, opened it, and handed him another memory card. "You didn't have to sneak around. I knew you'd do it. This one's the full version." Colin stared at her. For the first time, he felt fear. Not because she was dangerous, but because she knew exactly what she was doing and had planned every step. "Why?" he asked, his voice dry. Nora pulled the chair back and sat down again. Her face wasn't hard, wasn't soft, just quiet. The kind of quiet that had been planned ahead of time. "Because I needed you awake," she said. She looked up. "Awake enough to see who's who in this house, and to decide whose side you're on." Colin stood still, the memory card still in his hand. His mind was spinning. The pieces were falling into place, but the full picture was still in shadow. "You faked being paralyzed, for what?" His voice was rough, dry, like dust shaken loose from 10 years ago. Nora leaned back in her chair, one hand on the edge of the desk, the other curled into a loose fist. She looked him in the eye. No hesitation. No dressing it up. "The accident was real. 3 years ago. I was in the passenger seat. The car got hit head-on from the side. When I woke up, my legs wouldn't move. Everyone thought I was paralyzed." She paused for a moment. "But I wasn't." "You mean?" "I had a mild spinal injury. The doctor said I'd recover with 2 years of physical therapy. And when I realized I could stand again, I chose not to tell anyone." Colin frowned. "Why?" "Because I needed to disappear. I needed time to become something your parents wouldn't see coming." She stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled down an old folder, placed it in front of him. "They thought I was weak, the disabled daughter of a disgraced investor. The perfect piece to merge assets, a soft, harmless pawn." Colin opened the folder. Inside were detailed documents on the Caldwell financial system, more thorough than anything he'd ever been shown. "You know," she said quietly, "I didn't choose your family to marry into. I chose you." He looked up, eyes locked. "Because out of everyone," she said, "you were the most easily moved. Not cold like your father, not calculating like your mother. You were floating, soft, bendable." The words hit like nails hammered into Colin's chest. A quiet shame crept up the back of his neck. His face flushed, but his hand still clutched the folder. "So this whole thing, it was all staged?" he asked. Nora nodded. No guilt, no hesitation. "I needed a way in, someone close enough not to raise suspicion, Someone your entire family believed would never cross the line. And I was the tool. Not exactly, you were the unlocked door. Colin sat down. The chair gave a quiet screech as it slid. His head dropped, eyes clouded. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure who he was in the story. I don't love you, Nora said next, her voice softer. I'm being direct because you deserve the truth. Colin let out a dry, bitter laugh. Thanks for the honesty. But I don't hate you either. He looked up. Why not? Because you never did anything cruel, Nora said. You were just easy to guide, and I guided you into this, just like your parents once led my father into ruin. Colin swallowed hard. His chest felt heavy, like someone had tied a stone to his heart. He thought he'd been forced into this marriage. But the truth was, he'd been chosen. He thought he was unlucky, but really, he was just a piece in the plan. And the thing that choked him most wasn't that he'd been deceived. It was that Nora was right. In every meeting, he stayed silent, letting his father lead. Every time Julia asked questions about his family, he deflected. With every major decision in his life, he waited for someone else to give the green light. He was soft, exactly as she said. You can be angry if you want, Nora said. But Colin wasn't angry. He was ashamed. That feeling seeped into him like cold liquid. He thought of Julia, the woman he'd wanted to marry out of love, but never once had the courage to stand up for. He thought of all the times he'd signed company documents without reading them, just because Dad said it was fine. Nora looked at him like she could read every thought. You had will once. I saw it, but you kept choosing safety. You're not afraid I'll expose you? He asked. She smiled, a thin smile, like the surface of glass just before it cracks. If I were afraid, I wouldn't have let you see me stand. Colin stayed silent. The air between them thickened, like fog settling between two cliffs. He didn't know what to call Nora. Enemy? Savior? Wife? Puppet master? No word fit, no label felt true. Only one thing was certain, this wasn't a forced marriage anymore. This was a game, and he had walked into it late, and the woman sitting in front of him, she wasn't a pawn. She was the one who set the board. Colin couldn't sleep that night. After Nora's full confession, he went downstairs, and turned on every light in the living room, but didn't sit. He just stood there for hours, as if staying perfectly still might rewind the world back to where it all made sense. But it wouldn't. Things had been off for a long time. 3 days later, Julia came back to Seattle. She stood at the front door, pale as a ghost, frozen the moment she saw Colin Bouts, disheveled, exhausted, and behind him, Nora gliding past the hallway in that familiar wheelchair. What the hell are you living in right now? Julia asked, her eyes red, voice trembling with anger. Colin didn't answer right away. His mind was still a storm, no clear path through it. He just opened the door wider, inviting her in. She refused, stayed planted on the threshold like crossing it would break her into pieces. You married her for the money, didn't you? Colin stood there, silent. Julia let out a bitter laugh. Or was it pity? It wasn't pity, he said quietly. Then what was it? Her voice sharpened. Who is she to you? He couldn't answer. He didn't know how. Even he hadn't made sense of it yet. Julia clenched her jaw, swallowing the anger. Colin, I'm not a placeholder. I waited for you to get through this. I thought your family forced your hand. I didn't think you'd choose to be part of this mess. She stood there, eyes filled with more pain than rage. I'm asking one last time. If you stay with her, I walk, for good. Colin didn't nod. He didn't shake his head either. He just looked down. 1 beat, 2. And Julia understood. She turned and walked away, said nothing more. When the door closed behind her, Colin didn't move, back straight, eyes blank. He no longer knew if what he was doing was right or wrong. He only knew that Julia, the one person he'd once counted on to believe in him, no longer understood who he was. And Nora, the woman he once saw as a shadow, was now the only one who looked straight at him without blinking. That night, Colin stepped into his father's library, the room always locked, filled with contracts, stock certificates, and the credit fund plans behind the entire Caldwell group. He used to have access. But after the wedding, that access was revoked. Now, he had another way in. Nora had given him the key. Colin sat alone in the dark room, flipping through file after file of financial documents. The numbers didn't match. There were adjustment fees with no traceable source. Transfer contracts routed through shell companies, signed under the names of low-level employees, but tied to multi-million-dollar land parcels. The more he read, the colder his hands became. What he'd once believed were management errors were in fact deliberate moves. His father hadn't just manipulated the books. He'd used Colin's name to authorize multiple high-risk loans. "You see it now, don't you?" Nora's voice came from behind. No knock, no excuse, no need. Colin turned, startled, but he didn't flinch the way he used to. "My father," his voice caught in his throat. Nora sat across from him, arms crossed, her face cold but not emotionless. "Do you want out?" she asked, soft, clear, deep. Colin looked at her. His eyes were tired, but, for the first time, they didn't avoid hers. "What are you planning to do?" he asked. "That's not the question," she replied. "The question is, what are you planning to do?" He took a long breath, looked down at the mountain of documents in front of him. "Help me expose them." Colin's voice was steady now. Nora didn't nod, didn't refuse. She simply opened her laptop and placed it in front of him. "Then start here." From that night on, Colin wasn't on the sidelines anymore. He and Nora moved like a unit, quiet, precise, with no wasted words. By day, they played the role of the perfect couple. Nora gently wheeling beside Colin at family dinners. Colin giving silent nods when his father handed out tasks. They attended company galas, posed with investors, held hands in front of the press. No one suspected a thing. By night, they worked underground, literally, in the basement, surrounded by stacks of duplicated files pulled from the Caldwell archive. Nora dissected the cash flow. Colin combed through every signature, every stamp. More than once he went still, staring at a document he himself had signed. Documents that had enabled his father to siphon money through shady shell projects. He didn't even remember signing them. Maybe it was during a late-night family meeting, when his father shoved a stack across the table and said, "Just sign. It's all routine paperwork." But now, there was nothing routine about any of it. Nora had rebuilt the entire map. 8 years of money laundering and share manipulation orchestrated by Richard Caldwell. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She handed Colin the proof, piece by piece, internal emails, doctored contracts, side agreements, details he never thought he'd have the courage to face. Then one night, when the puzzle was complete, she closed her laptop, looked him dead in the eye. "It's time for you to step into the light." The quarterly shareholder meeting was scheduled for Tuesday, at the main Caldwell Group headquarters. The boardroom was massive, framed in glass, lit by soft amber light that gleamed off rows of polished leather chairs. Each seat had a nameplate, its own bottle of water, and a sealed envelope containing the latest quarterly financial report, a version carefully polished by his father's accounting team. The official version. The lie. Colin arrived on time, taking his seat to the left of Richard. Nora sat one chair over, hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes down, not acknowledging anyone. They exchanged polite nods with a few familiar shareholders, greeted some partners from the Boston branch. Everything looked polished, controlled. Until Colin stood. "Before we begin," he said, "I have a supplemental report to present." The room shifted. A few heads turned. Colin connected the USB to the projector. Slides appeared, spreadsheets, contracts, internal emails. Evidence that Richard Caldwell had manipulated share transfers, siphoned company funds, and used the group's name to guarantee personal loans. A shareholder shot up from their seat. "What is this?" Colin met the question head-on, voice calm. "This," he said, "is the truth." Richard didn't have time to react before the projector displayed a contract, signed in Colin's handwriting when he was just 25. "Son." Richard choked. "I didn't know what I was signing back then," Colin said. "Now I do." The room grew thick with silence. Some flipped through notebooks, others leaned in to whisper to their legal counsel. A board member leaned toward the mic. "I propose we suspend Chairman Richard Caldwell from his duties pending formal investigation." Richard shot to his feet. "What do you think you're doing? This is my company. It has my name on it." Colin didn't move. He stood still, eyes locked forward. That's when Mrs. Caldwell, his mother, rose from the back row, marched forward and struck him across the face. The sound of the slap cracked through the room, sharp enough to make several people flinch. "You're a traitor," she hissed through clenched teeth. "For that snake and angel skin, you'd stab your own parents in the back." Colin didn't answer. Nora stood, wheeling herself calmly to the front of the room. Her gaze was steady. "You call me a snake?" she asked. Mrs. Caldwell whipped around. "You're something I never trusted. You came here with broken legs and an innocent face. I learned from you," Nora cut in. Her voice was level, cold. No need to raise it. The entire room fell silent. Nora turned her chair and rolled toward the exit. Colin followed behind her. No one stopped them. No one spoke. No one dared meet their eyes. As they stepped out of the Caldwell building, the midday sun hit Colin straight in the face. He paused for a moment and looked back at the glass tower where he had grown up, where he had learned to bow, to obey, to be afraid. Then he walked away. Didn't look back. The new apartment was on the 13th floor, north side of the city. Not big, not fancy, but quiet enough to hear the wind rustling through the trees in the park across the street. Colin sat at the kitchen table, fingers laced. Across from him was Nora, her hair draped over one shoulder, an oversized gray sweater hiding most of her posture. She was staring out the window. "So, it's done now," Colin said, voice low. "You planning to leave?" Nora didn't turn right away. The silence stretched so long he almost wished he hadn't asked. "At first, it was revenge," she said, still watching the misty Seattle sky. "But now," she turned toward him. Her eyes weren't sharp. They weren't soft either. Just deep. Like someone who'd swum through layers of stone and hadn't yet surfaced. "I'm not sure anymore." Colin didn't ask anything else. He knew he didn't need to. Someone like Nora wouldn't say a word unless she was sure, and she wouldn't make a promise unless she was ready to keep it. They sat in silence by the open window, letting the breeze move gently through their hair and the scent of new wood. No one spoke. But for the first time, the silence wasn't tense. No more accusations. No more tactics, no more performance, just two people who had once been used, once been pawns, now sitting without needing to win. That afternoon, Colin's phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He answered. A woman's voice came through, calm, precise. "I'm calling from the Bright Ledger Foundation. We're working on a project to protect financial abuse survivors manipulated by real estate corporations. Our founder said, you might be able to help us with the legal side." Colin narrowed his eyes. "Who's your founder?" "She signs as Nora Greystone." He leaned back in his chair, looked up at the ceiling, then let out a soft laugh. An email arrived minutes later. A case file neatly compiled, over 40 verified victims, from rural families forced to sell land to retirees misled into bogus investments. Each one marked, verified, in active support. Colin flipped to the last page. The logo of the foundation, one hand reaching out from the dark, gripping another, smaller, trembling. He closed the file, looked over at Nora, now sitting on the sofa, book in hand. "You're not simple," he said. No sarcasm, no smile. Nora didn't look up, just replied, flat and honest, "Neither are you." The room settled into quiet again. The breeze played gently with the curtains, like the space itself was finally breathing, for the first time after a long, silent storm. And then a single thought surfaced in Colin's mind, not from anyone else, but from himself, after everything. Sometimes, when you think you're the one in control, you're really just being taught how to start living again. Some relationships begin in damage, in calculation, even in lies. But sometimes it's from those fractures that people are forced to turn inward, to ask who's truly living their life and who's just existing inside someone else's design. Colin had always stood in the middle, between his parents and his conscience, between love and obligation, between freedom and a gilded cage. But when he chose to act, to face the truth, to trust the one person he once doubted most, he found something power could never buy: himself. As for Nora, she never needed forgiveness. She only needed to be seen for who she really was. Not a victim, not a villain, just a human being. And sometimes that kind of clarity is the most healing thing of all. What do you think about Colin's choice? If it were you, could you forgive someone who faked being paralyzed just to enter your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your side. And if you're into stories that dig deep into conflict, tough choices, and buried truths, don't forget to hit subscribe to Family Drama so you never miss what's next. We tell the stories that feel like movies, but they happen right here, in real life.